Hello, it's Murphy Daily with another book review for written by Murphy. This book review is Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. It was a beast of a book, and it is called Leviathan, right? That told you, it's in the title. This is a big fat book, and I read it because I knew it was an extremely influential book, and I wanted to know what that was about. So I read it. It was a lot of book. It was published in 1651, and it was in England, right? So England, in around about 1651, was still wrestling with what right it had to be its own. It was a monarch, but it had, King Henry VIII had kicked out the Catholic Church, and so this guy, and this was very much the age of reason, right? This was the Enlightenment, and people were trying to figure out, hey, why are we the way we are? Why do we do the things we do? And what's the reason and the logic? Very, very much reason. And so that's what Thomas Hobbes is in the tradition of. He was super careful when he was going through this book to talk about how and give a very strong foundation for why different things are done the way they're done. And it was therefore extremely tedious. I can't go in and tell you, it's very like a legal book, a philosophy book about how government should happen. This is interesting because it's in the tradition of what they were very excited about in the age of reason of the Greek philosophers. They're like, oh, philosophers, we'll be like that. We'll do our own philosophy. So he defined, like, how do we know what we know? We know what we know because we can sense it. And that's how everything is known. Like, oh, kind of basic. How do we know what we see? Well, we see it. Yeah, these kind of very basic things. Socrates did a lot of that. Okay, so he was following in that method that we learned from the Greek philosophers. And he very carefully went through this logical, reasoned, and proofed out, like given evidence and proof for the way things are, and to his view, the way things should be. The word Leviathan itself, he refers to, he didn't talk about it a lot. He just kind of mentions it. He's referring it to the Commonwealth. This is political philosophy. So he was saying this is how it works to be a government. And this is why the king has the right to do this, and the people have the right to do this, and we have these obligations, and this is how we know what is right. And he got pretty granular. I can't go deep into it, like I said, but I read it all, and I saw, what he was trying to do. He was very careful. Another thing which would not happen in a political book now is he had the last section. I can't remember what part it was. I think it was the fourth part. It's either the third or fourth part, the last part, where he goes into all of the biblical rationale for how politics should work, how government should work. And this is like straight up chapter and verse. Tons and tons of chapter and verse. Now, when it comes to the Bible, I was raised in a very biblical environment, and I read the Bible, the whole thing, when I was 12 because, well, yeah, I read. So I read it, and so this was familiar to me. I'm like, oh yeah, when he brought up different examples, I knew what he was talking about. These were familiar stories to me, so it felt very ordinary to me. I think that modern readers of Leviathan, many of them might not be as familiar with those stories and wouldn't see now we've moved forward. Back in 1651, it felt necessary to have a religious reason and have religious proof for what he was asserting. Now we've moved beyond that because of Hobbes, very much because of this foundational work that he did. He said, okay, this is how we do things. This is how we know what we know. Here's the proof and the evidence for why it should be this way. That's a lot of work. He took a long time to write down every circumstance that he could think of that was proof for how a government should be. This was definitely the sort of the encyclopedia of everything that a government needed. And who else would do such a thing? Who would write a whole encyclopedia? Well, Hobbes did, and therefore it was influential. One of his famous quotes is, "Life is nasty, brutish, and short," which is very realistic, which is part of the, this age of being, I guess it was right on the edge of the realism period. But he's saying, hey, this is not romantic. We don't need to wave a fairy wand over how things are, because it just is the way it is. Life is not anything else but nasty, brutish, and short. This is who we are. So let's acknowledge it. Let's get ready to work together and do this thing of being a society, being a commonwealth. So it was very interesting to read this book and find out what he's about, and this foundational book that so many people took from to create the next level up and the next level up as we were trying to work out what it means to be a commonwealth that is what I would call now crowdsourced. We are all working this out together. So he was one of the first people who wrote out what it's supposed to be. And he as an individual, he as a person, hung around. He had relationships with people who were in government. So he was not himself in government, but he was an observer of this through the families that he knew. And so he had a good view of how to write it all out. So that's Leviathan. It's really foundational. I'm glad I read it, but oh my gosh, it was really long, and I will say rather tedious. Still, I'm glad I read it. I can see what it's about. I think that a synopsis, for the most part, for the average person might be enough, but I wanted to experience the whole thing, and so I did. Okay, friends. I don't know. Have you read it? What do you think? I'd love to know.